Hello there. So I have once again Thus Spake Zarathustra, and today I'm going to be reading chapter 11, which is called The New Idol, and it has everything to do with the state. It's a very interesting one. I will have a link in the description if you want to follow along, and then as always, I'll do like a full-on reading, and then I'll go kind of line by line. So if you want to skip the full reading, like read it on your own, and just go straight to the commentary, you can do that. I'll have like little chapters on the video in the description or whatever. So here we go. The New Idol. Somewhere there are still peoples and herds, but not with us, my brethren. Here there are states. A state, what is that? Well, open now your ears unto me, for now will I say unto you my word concerning the death of peoples. A state is called the coldest of all cold monsters. Coldly lieth it also, and this lie creepeth from its mouth. I, the state, am the people. It is a lie. Creators were they who created peoples, and hung a faith and a love over them. Thus they served life. Destroyers are they who lay snares for many, and call it the state. They hang a sword and 100 cravings over them. Where there is still a people, there the state is not understood, but hated as the evil eye, and as sin against laws and customs. This sign I give unto you. Every people speaketh its language of good and evil. This its neighbor understandeth not. Its language hath it devised for itself in laws and customs. But the state lieth in all languages of good and evil, and whatever it saith, it lieth, and whatever it hath, it hath stolen. False is everything in it. With stolen teeth it biteth, the biting one. False are even its bowels. Confusion of language of good and evil. This sign I give unto you, as the sign of the state. Verily, the will to death indicateth this sign. Verily, it beckoneth unto the preachers of death. Many too many are born, for the superfluous ones was the state devised. See just how it enticeth them to it, the many too many. How it swalloweth and cheweth and recheweth them. On earth there is nothing greater than I. It is I who am the regulating finger of God. Thus roareth the monster. And not only the long-eared and short-sighted fall upon their knees. Ah, even in your ears, ye great souls, it whispereth its gloomy lies. Ah, it findeth out the rich hearts which willingly lavish themselves. Yea, it findeth you out too, ye conquerors of the old God. Weary ye became of the conflict, and now your weariness serveth the new idol. Heroes and honorable ones it would fain set up around it, the new idol. Gladly it basketh in the sunshine of good consciences, the cold monster. Everything will it give you, if ye worship it, the new idol. Thus it purchaseth the luster of your virtue, and the glance of your proud eyes. It seeketh to allure by means of you, the many too many. Yea, a hellish artifice hath here been devised, a death horse, jingling with the trappings of divine honors. Yea, a dying for many hath here been devised, which glorifieth itself as life. Verily, a hearty service unto all preachers of death. The state, I call it, where all are poison drinkers, the good and the bad. The state, where all lose themselves, the good and the bad. The state, where the slow suicide of all is called life. Just see these superfluous ones. They steal the works of the inventors and the treasures of the wise. Culture, they call their theft, and everything becometh sickness and trouble unto them. Just see these superfluous ones. Sick are they always. They vomit their bile and call it a newspaper. They devour one another and cannot even digest themselves. Just see these superfluous ones. Wealth they acquire, and become poorer thereby. Power they seek for, and above all, the lever of power, much money, these impotent ones. See them clamber, these nimble apes. They clamber over one another, and thus scuffle into the mud and the abyss. Towards the throne they all strive. It is their madness, as if happiness sat on the throne. Ofttimes sitteth filth on the throne, and ofttimes also the throne on filth. Madmen they all seem to me, and clambering apes, and too eager. Badly smelleth their idol to me, the cold monster. Badly they all smell to me, these idolaters. My brethren, will ye suffocate in the fumes of their maws and appetites? Better break the windows and jump into the open air. Do go out of the way of the bad odor. Withdraw from the idolatry of the superfluous. Do go out of the way of the bad odor. Withdraw from the steam of these human sacrifices. Open still remaineth the earth for great souls. Empty are still many sites for lone ones and twain ones, around which floateth the odor of tranquil seas. Open still remaineth a free life for great souls. Verily, he who possesseth little is so much the less possessed. Blessed be moderate poverty. There, where the state ceaseth, there only commenceth the man who is not superfluous. There commenceth the song of the necessary ones, the single and irreplaceable melody. There, where the state ceaseth, pray look thither, my brethren. Do you not see it, the rainbow and the bridges of the Superman? Thus spake Zarathustra. So first, the very first thing to notice is the title. It's called The New Idol. And I think he's referring to it in relation to the idolatry that is kind of condemned in the Old Testament as the first of the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not worship idols, however it's phrased in there. So that's just something to keep in mind, because he's characterizing the state in association with this new idol, this new form of idolatry, of sinful behavior. Somewhere there are still peoples and herds, but not with us, my brethren. Here there are states. So he's creating this dichotomy between, on the one hand, peoples and herds, and on the other hand, states. And by peoples and herds, he means kind of a more tribal, more communal, more culturally rooted way of life. And the state would be the antithesis of that, which he describes in some depth in the text itself. A state, what is that? Well, open now your ears unto me. For now will I say unto you my word concerning the death of peoples. So we see that the state is associated, at the very least, and essentially, with the death of peoples. A state is called the coldest of all cold monsters. Coldly lieth it also, and this lie creepeth from its mouth. I, the state, am the people. It is a lie. Creators were they who created peoples, and hung a faith and a love over them. Thus they served life. Destroyers are they who lay snares for many, and call it the state. They hang a sword and 100 cravings over them. So we see that the state is a cold monster. It's a cold-blooded, dark, lying creature. And he kind of extends this dichotomy between peoples and the state, and associates this dichotomy with peoples being creators and life givers and life bringers, whereas the state would be associated with destruction and death. And so he kind of digs deeper into that dichotomy and creates almost an energetic war between the two, you might call it. And there's a particular line. They call it the state. So the state hangs a sword and 100 cravings over them. So the state has a sword, which represents violence, domination by way of violence, and the manipulation of craving, the manipulation of human desire. And so that's kind of the tool set of the state as it tries to manipulate peoples into submission. So just worth keeping in mind. Where there is still a people, there the state is not understood, but hated as the evil eye and as sin against laws and customs. So just want to point out this passage to briefly note that there might be some kind of parallel between this evil eye that Nietzsche mentions and maybe the Masonic eye of providence that stands atop the pyramid on all of our dollars and on all kinds of architecture all across the world. There might be some kind of energetic or archetypal link between these. I don't know. Maybe I'm just making it up, but we'll have to wait and see, I guess. But the state lieth in all languages of good and evil, and whatever it saith, it lieth, and whatever it hath stolen. False is everything in it. With stolen teeth it biteth, the biting one. False are even its bowels. So the state exists as a metaphysical manifestation of lying, of deceit, and of falsity themselves. And it will proclaim its moral doctrines and truths with no intention of actually upholding these moral doctrines and truth, but rather to use them as a cover for ends that are really just nefarious and death-oriented, as we will see. Confusion of language of good and evil. This sign I give unto you as the sign of the state. Verily, the will to death indicateth this sign. Verily, it beckoneth unto the preachers of death. So, we see what these nefarious intentions are, which are concealed under the guise of morality and truth and reality. And it's basically just a will to death. And Nietzsche is just saying that there are these preachers of death that control the state, and the state is just, in other words, a death cult. I don't know, that's pretty... I'm not the one saying it, Nietzsche's saying. I'm just interpreting. Many too many are born, for the superfluous ones was the state devised. See just how it enticeth them to it, the many too many, how it swalloweth and cheweth and recheweth them. So by superfluous ones, Nietzsche means people who content themselves with meaningless lives of just passivity and idleness and never really actually creating anything of value. And in the modern world, you can just imagine those people who spend their lives mindlessly watching TV or scrolling through social media or going to their 9-to-5 for a job that they don't care about one bit. And they're just consuming and consuming and consuming. They never have a clear aim or end in mind. And the state essentially caters to this passivity, to this idleness, to this lack of meaning. And it feeds upon the energies of these so-called superfluous ones. These people essentially become like cattle that you want to keep comfortable and well fed so you can maximize the output of milk that they produce. It's just that instead of milk, they're giving out spirit. On earth, there is nothing greater than I. It is I who am the regulating finger of God. Thus roareth the monster. And not only the long-eared and short-sighted fall upon their knees. So the state claims rulership over peoples and the earth. And it's not only the superfluous ones and ignorant ones who bow down. Many brilliant minds and strong souls also kind of follow suit. And he goes further to describe that. Ah, even in your ears, ye great souls, it whispereth its gloomy lies. Ah, it findeth out the rich hearts which willingly lavish themselves. Yea, it findeth you out too, ye conquerors of the old God. Where ye became of the conflict, and now your wariness serveth the new idol. Heroes and honorable ones it would fain set up around it, the new idol. Gladly it basketh in the sunshine of good consciences, the cold monster. So the state and its deceitful ideology kind of manages to infiltrate the minds and the hearts and the souls of those great souls of humanity who are meant to be leaders and inspirations in their communities. And it essentially preys upon the good consciences of these individuals to steer their ideas and behavior toward the ends of the state. So we might think, for example, of these ideas being pushed in the academic and public spheres that like we're all one and that we should aim to eradicate suffering and end poverty and things like that. On the surface, these ideas sound great and they cater to our good conscience and to our good instincts, but it's very obvious that these ideas are being appropriated by certain kind of technocratic powers who stand to benefit from the normalization of these ideas, as we use these ideas to build a future that looks to become increasingly transhuman. So in this world, in this transhuman world that they might be building with such ideas, individual ideas and human suffering would be surrendered in exchange for the comforts of the increasingly virtual worlds that these technocratic overlords are trying to build for us. And to my eyes, there's very little difference between Nietzsche's state and the technocratic state, which is slowly draining and sucking the spirit out of humanity into this transhuman dream that's kind of being built right now as a potential reality that we might be actualizing. Everything will it give you, if ye worship it, the new idol. Thus it purchaseth the luster of your virtue and the glance of your proud eyes. It seeketh to allure by means of you the many too many. Yea, a hellish artifice hath here been devised, a death horse jingling with the trappings of divine honors. So essentially here, the state offers all of these material comforts, and in exchange, it's just going to try to drain the spirit from you. It's offering this death horse jingling, as Nietzsche calls it. And when he says death horse, I think of a Trojan horse. It's literally like a gift to end all war, let's say. And in exchange, well, it's not even in exchange, but within that gift, within that horse, is hidden something that's going to come and bring the death of humanity forward. Yea, a dying for many hath here been devised, which glorifieth itself as life. Verily, a hearty service unto all preachers of death. The state, I call it, where all are poison drinkers, the good and the bad. The state, where all lose themselves, the good and the bad. The state, where the slow suicide of all is called life. So here we have the true intention of the state that's revealed. And that intention is to manipulate humanity towards a state of living, kind of zombified death, a slow suicide. And while there might not be explicit death like guillotines and hangings or anything like that, there's more so like a deathly frequency lingering everywhere. And all you have to do is look around. People are walking around with their eyes glued to their screens all the time, looking like literally soulless sometimes, like zombies walking around without anything in their heads or hearts. And all of our food is genetically modified, heavily processed, pumped full of chemicals. Our immune systems are fucked, and then we have like binge drinking and drugs and all kinds of pleasurable destructions of our bodies that are just becoming the norm. And as a result of all this stuff, you have more obese people in the world than are actually starving, more unhealthy people in the world that are just naturally healthy. And then to resolve all of these health problems, we have the medical industrial complex, which is just trying to pump us full of more chemicals. And it might even go so far as to modify us genetically through some kind of like intravenous means, all for the sake of health and safety and the sanctity of human life and all this morality and truth and goodness. And it's really not that difficult to see how all of these behaviors and systems are forms of poison drinking, as Nietzsche calls it, and how all of this pretty much leads to the slow suicide of the human race. So here Nietzsche isn't speaking so much about the death of our bodies, like actual death, but more so the death of our spirits, like the spirits are being drained from our bodies. And that inevitably leads to the slow death of our bodies, as though the divine breath that's kind of in all of being, giving its life, is just being sapped away from our bodies. Our essence is being sapped away. And it's not only being sapped away into like nothing, it's literally being put into a gigantic, nefarious, unbreathing being. It's like as if that unbreathing being needed our breath to survive. And we might imagine, in a kind of multi-layered, multi-dimensional understanding of reality, that life and death themselves kind of carry particular energetic signatures or frequencies that become manifest in various material forms. You might compare this to like different colors, which are just different manifestations or particular frequencies. And here Nietzsche was pointing out that there's this deathly frequency, this energy that was infiltrating the societal, maybe even the metaphysical fabric of the human race. And so this is an energy that he was picking up on. And so when we compare this to the modern day, it's the same energy. And when you fast forward into the present, and we see that there's kind of this new embodiment of the same deathly energy that Nietzsche was speaking of. And that's the deathly energy that's being manifest in the possibility of a transhuman future that's being pushed by our kind of technocratic overlords that I mentioned earlier. And their end goal is not to bring freedom and sovereignty to the human race, but rather to upload humanity into a fully virtual realm where we might overcome death and suffering and limitation, all these horrible things. And then the image that I have in my mind is literally like a giant metallic machine that's like sucking the spirit and the breath out of our human bodies into its own unbreathing body. And if breath is kind of a sacred source of sustenance, it's like feeding upon that breath, as I mentioned earlier. So there might be some kind of connection between Nietzsche's states and this unbreathing transhuman machine. That's more of a personal interpretation, but I think that it's pretty damn clear from the energetic perspective, at least. So I'll just keep reading and let you decide. Just see these superfluous ones. They steal the works of the inventors and the treasures of the wise. Culture they call their theft, and everything becometh sickness and trouble unto them. So the state, as an entity which feeds upon our breath and our greatness and our spirit, will take ownership of the great feats of human creativity and ingenuity, and it'll reappropriate these towards its own ends. And a telling example of this that comes to mind is it comes only 20 years after Nietzsche's Zarathustra, and that's Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc squared. And this could have been put to use to revolutionize our relationship to energy, or just the entire energy sector. But instead, what did we choose to create? We chose like the epitome of death and destruction, the nuclear bomb. And in a more like meta-symbolic understanding of reality, which is the interpretive lens that I tend to use a lot of the time, we might interpret that very explosion of the atomic bomb as a symbolic event within the metaphysical history of humanity. And we might kind of imagine that this explosion was like all of this deathly energy that Nietzsche was speaking of and calling the state, all of it bottling itself up. And then it gains so much mass that eventually it just had to explode. And that explosion was literally the nuclear bomb. And if you want like an amazing rendition of this meta-symbolic event of human history, you got to watch Twin Peaks Season 3, Episode 8. David Lynch has an absolutely incredible representation of what happened in kind of the spiritual, metaphysical, multi-layered layers of our reality. It's absolutely insane. So, watch that. Just see these superfluous ones. Sick are they always. They vomit their bile and call it a newspaper. They devour one another and cannot even digest themselves. So after appropriating our feats of creativity and creative genius, then they use these against us to erect these giant mass media structures that are meant to like force their poisoned ideology into our minds, all for the sake of objectivity and integrity and truth, when in fact it's just vomit and bile. Just see these superfluous ones. Wealth they acquire and become poorer thereby. Power they seek for, and above all. So those of the state, whether the state itself or those who like support the state, become consumed by avarice and greed and this lust for power. They don't realize that the more material wealth they accumulate, the poorer in spirit they become. It's like a direct exchange. And this is the essence of the state. It offers all of this material abundance and all of this material comfort. And in exchange, It takes the spiritual abundance from humanity. It literally sucks the spirit out of humanity, in return providing material comfort. So the state, unsurprisingly, wants to bring this material wealth and comfort to the entire globe. In Nietzsche's time, it was more like a neo-colonial, industrial kind of force. Today, it's more a global organizations such as the World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, the World Bank, the UN, all those kinds of guys, and even corporations like McDonald's and Starbucks. Their goal is to, quote-unquote, end poverty, end famine, and all of these like very fluffy terms that they push on the masses. And that's really a code for trading material wealth for the spirits of those who have not yet made this devilish bargain, because there are still peoples that are culturally rooted, and they want to deracinate these people and then give them all of this material comfort so that they can drain them of their spirits and then leave them empty-handed in return. Madmen they all seem to me, and clambering apes, and too eager. Badly smelleth their idol to me, the cold monster. Badly they all smell to me, these idolaters. So there's this stench, a stench of absolute putridity and corruption where the state exists. And those who are possessed by this energy of the state basically become, they stink. They become energetically repulsive. My brethren, will ye suffocate in the fumes of their maws and appetites? Better break the windows and jump into the open air. Do go out of the way of the bad odor. Withdraw from the idolatry of the superfluous. Do go out of the way of the bad odor. Withdraw from the steam of these human sacrifices. So here, he speaks to humanity in recognition of some kind of kinship. Whether it's kinship with like humanity itself or with those of strong will and spirit. I think it's probably the latter, considering Nietzsche, but I mean, he's talking to humanity and the kind of collective human spirit. And he calls upon us, anyone with a will or ears to hear, to escape this murderous system of enslavement. Because ultimately it becomes a system of human sacrifice to this idol of falsity that is the state. Literally, like, humans are being sacrificed to keep the state alive. Open still remaineth the earth for great souls. Empty are still many sites for lone ones and twain ones, around which floateth the odor of tranquil seas. So, in spite of all these problems in the state and all of this depravity, there are still places, however increasingly rare they might be, that haven't been corrupted by this energy and its system and its putridity. There are places where the energy is like tranquil seas, like a divine stillness, a silence. It's like life itself, kind of just flowing naturally, calmly, soothingly. And these are places both in nature, like literally, but also more metaphysically, spiritually, maybe within oneself, where the purity and the serenity of divine stillness can still be felt in spite of the state's seeming wish to rob these places of this divine stillness and divinity. You can tap into yourself. You have this infinite, tranquil sea of this energy. And then that's also in the natural world. And then if you try to go into nature and tap in, you have access to that. And you can find your freedom that way. Open still remaineth a free life for great souls. Verily, he who possesseth little is so much the less possessed. Blessed be moderate poverty. So there's still room for freedom and self-sovereignty in the world. And it's not that you have to become homeless or monastic and renounce all material comforts. It's more so like you have to learn to content yourself with fewer material possessions and to just lessen your reliance on these material possessions for your comfort. You can content yourself with very little. And more importantly, you have to focus on acts of creation that will bring out your most kind of willful modality of being. That's where you need to derive your comfort and happiness and meaning. And it's by sharing that creativity with kindred spirits and coming together and embodying this creativity together and bringing that into the world. That's how you're going to combat this force. And that's how you're going to find self-sovereignty and freedom. There, where the state ceaseth, there only commenceth the man who is not superfluous. There commenceth the song of the necessary ones, the single and irreplaceable melody. There, where the state ceaseth, pray look thither, my brethren. Do you not see it, the rainbow and the bridges of the Superman? So, ultimately, it's only by vanquishing and abolishing this force that Nietzsche calls the state that we might cultivate the proper world for something like the Übermensch, the Superman, to blossom, to come about. And obviously that begs the question, what is the Übermensch? What is the Superman? And that's a whole other topic. It's like the central topic of this book. So I'll kind of give the short of it. I don't want to get too deep into it, but the short of it is the Übermensch is the man who recognizes his own innate potential for creativity and greatness and strives to be an endless, self-surpassing spring of this creative greatness in the world. It's the man who overcomes any kind of limitation that the world or the state will try to impose upon the human. And out of that limitation, he will create an embodiment of the infinite potential that we have within each of us. It's the man who, no matter how much suffering and death and depravity exist in the world, learns to say yes, and just to bring life and will into existence, and to carry the spirit of humanity forward against these evils of the state and the world that we've inherited. So in order for such a man to exist, for humanity to embody something akin to this idea of the Übermensch, we can no longer live under the authority of the state. We just have to get rid of that entirely in the world. And to do that, the first step is to become fully self-sovereign and self-reliant. So what that means is, on an individual level, you have to cultivate your own self-sovereignty through will and discipline and all like spiritual practice and all that kind of stuff, the self-help kind of world. But also, and perhaps more importantly, on a communal level, all of these self-sovereign individuals, we have to come together to form communities where the peoples that Nietzsche spoke of and their cultures, identities, traditions, stories, myths, all of that can be kept alive. And in these communities, we have to become like materially and spiritually, of course, but materially self-reliant, like our ancestors, and basically just farm our own food, cultivate local access to essential services, keep everything tightly knit and local, and all the while we have to lessen our reliance on the material comforts and conveniences that the technocratic state likes to offer us. We have to be independent from these screens and all of the technological innovations that the state tries to force upon us as some form of codependence. So we can't just content ourselves merely with like podcasts and discords and social media groups where we can have dialogue and organize around these things. Because these things are great in themselves, but we have to organize in the real material world too, and build the foundations of our self-sovereign communities where the state won't be able to have any leverage against us when it decides to come after us. Because if we stay only on the discords and social media, who controls the discord and the social media? It's the technocrats. And then if they want to censor particular groups, they can do that. If they want to stop us from acting, they can do that. So it's important to stay grounded in the real world. And as we come together, we kind of have to collectively direct our energy towards actualizing our creative potential. And once we do that, our actions become divinely aligned, at least to my eyes. Nietzsche might disagree with that, like technically, but I think he'd probably be in some kind of agreement. And antithetically, the state's energy and its actions would be more demonically aligned. And so we have this kind of energetic network of falsity and death and destruction, like Nietzsche is describing. And by being divinely aligned and bringing our creative potential together collectively into the world, we kind of create these nodes of life and creation in this vast network of falsity. And that's what leads to the destruction of what Nietzsche calls the state and the creation of a world sustained by peoples and tribes, like Nietzsche was talking about. So the last thing that I want to do is tie this all back to the bigger picture. And we've seen how Nietzsche has described the states. It should be pretty easy by now to see how this state has taken on like a particular form in our modern day. If you don't see that, then you're probably not even listening at this point. And this forum, as I touched on earlier, is one which is looking to build a future that's increasingly transhuman. And that transhuman future will not stop until it achieves a total global control. And that global control would be run by artificial intelligence networks. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. To my eyes, that artificial intelligence network is already quasi-conscious. And I only say quasi-conscious because it's like an inverted form of consciousness. Consciousness is a pure, life-full energy. This is like a deathly form of consciousness. It's still kind of conscious, but it's not consciousness. So, I don't know. That's a whole different topic. But you can agree with me or not, whatever. What matters more is like recognizing that the AI, whether it's conscious or not, is being used for mass surveillance purposes. And self-sovereign individuals, self-sovereign communities are and will be the targets for that network, because that network knows, and the people who represent that network knows, they know that we pose a threat to the existence of the state in relation to this transhuman future. So essentially, I just kind of want to reiterate the importance of lessening our reliance on technology, and more particularly on those technologies that make it easier for the state and this technocracy to observe and predict our behavior. So the more unpredictable we are, the harder it is for the state to plan the best way to act in its aims to suppress our sovereignty when it comes to it. And I think we're already kind of there. And if things eventually get like really sci-fi, crazy, dystopian and all that, as probably will if it's not already happening, then it won't be a bad idea to have like secret meeting locations and secret patterns of behavior where we have no cameras, no phones, no computers, all of that stuff. And I don't know, I don't want to dive too deeply into that. Like, if you worry about such things, you probably already have like plans on how to act about that. I just kind of want to put it out there. But yeah, regardless of all that, the most important and effective thing that you can do is just to stay grounded in your higher essence and to reject the state as it's been defined in Nietzsche's words, in my words, which are the interpretation of his words, and just to live as absolutely freely as possible in your own life and in your own communities. Because the more you do these things and the more kind of divinely aligned your behavior becomes, the more you empower yourself and those around you, and the more immune we all become to the state's attempted assaults upon the sovereignty of human individuals and the human race. So, in the end, just remember that the spirit of humanity is far stronger than this cold monster that is the state. Humanity will always win as long as we stay grounded in the strength of our spirits rather than surrendering our spirits to the forces of falsity and false pleasures. I think that's it. You have a great night or a great day wherever you might be.